What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and we're back again today with a new series called Emacs IDE. For those of you who were on the failed first version of this stream, hopefully this is working correctly for you this time. No, is it the same? Same audio issue? Oh, Jesus Christ. Is there an echo or is there no echo? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna start this whole intro over again. I don't even remember what I said, but let's just roll with it. So today we are starting off a new series called Emacs IDE, and basically the idea is that we're gonna pick up where we left off from the episode number 8 of the Emacs from Scratch series, where we talked about how to set up lsp-mode to get advanced editing functionality into Emacs. So the dap-mode is a companion mode to lsp-mode that is for debugging. So what it does is it is able to use external debugging programs via debug adapters that allow you to plug in advanced debugging functionality into Emacs. So this is another thing that came out of the development of Visual Studio Code. So like lsp-mode, there was a new protocol called the language server protocol that got implemented that enabled any editor to take an external language server and then hook it into their client or their UI to provide editing or rich language functionality. For the debug adapter protocol, it's another protocol that's similar to the language server protocol, but it also has debugging commands, basically, so that whenever you use dap-mode in Emacs, you're able to leverage the full power of a debugger and have rich UI in Emacs that allows you to debug your program. So basically, we are going to figure out how to set that up today. And if you've ever tried to use dap-mode before, you might have noticed that it's maybe not exactly straightforward to set up. So I'm going to show you basically the run through of how to get that set up for a single language. And then what we're going to do is in future versions of the Emacs IDE series, we're going to go deep into individual languages to cover the LSP and DAP setup for both of them. So we're going to have individual videos for all of those. So that's something to look out for in the future. So as always, we are recording this live, and we have the live chat active. There's a lot of people here. Thank you all for joining today. I apologize for the problems earlier. Hopefully everything's going to go better this time. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into it then. So we are going to use our existing Emacs from Scratch configuration for this. We're going to just go right where we left off from the lsp-mode config, and we're going to figure out how to set up the dap-mode. One thing I do want to mention before I move further is that there is a website that gives you information on how to set up dap-mode for each language. It is on GitHub.io. Let me pull this open real fast, and then we'll be able to take a look at that. So if you go to the dap-mode page, sorry for the blinding whiteness here, it gives you information about how to configure it, and there's also information for each of the supported languages. So if you look in the menu, you can see all of the different languages here that it has support for the dap-mode. So if you want to learn how to do your specific language, you can go to this page to figure that out. So let's see, I'm going to kill my panel just in case we run into issues with that. So let me go back to here, kill panel. Okay, so first of all we really have to do is just set up dap-mode using use package like we normally do. So let me find my lsp-mode section, and I'm going to drop dap-mode below all of this. So we'll say debugging with dap-mode. And then we're going to bring in this use package configuration. And we'll go ahead and just run that. So this is going to install. Here's this common issue with package.el. We have to refresh our package archive. So let me hit this real quick. So package refresh contents. So sometimes if you run into this issue where it says a package is not found when you try to install something using use package, just run the package refresh contents command, and that will get everything fixed up for you. So we've installed dap-mode here, and now we've made it active. And that's not really the only thing we have to do, because for each language that dap-mode supports, there's a separate module that you have to load that has specific functionality for each one of them. So what we're going to do is copy this little bit so that we can debug a Node.js application written in TypeScript. And we will drop that into the TypeScript config section. So what I'll do is set up or add this bit of configuration to the TypeScript mode setup. And what this is doing is it's requiring the built-in dap-mode package. And also it's running this dap-mode setup command. So each of the languages, or often the languages that are supported by dap-mode, have individual setup commands. And what they will do is try to download the necessary debug adapter for that language so that you can have an easier time setting it up. Because otherwise you would have to go find the debug adapter package and download it and then extract it to a known location on your system and wire everything up. These setup commands make it a lot easier. I think if you were to search for the dap setup commands, yeah, probably you don't see the rest of them because they're all in the individual modules. So what I'm going to do right now is just run the dap-mode setup, and basically what it does is it downloads the debugger package from I guess the Visual Studio Marketplace and puts it on your local machine so that it can be used for debugging TypeScript. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up a project I've already been working on so that we can show how to run the debugger with that. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll pick up on those. So let's go and open up this hack panel project that I was working on. Basically, it's like a local server for making a custom stream overlay, which I never did make any further progress on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna figure out how to run this in the debugger. So I'm gonna show you a few commands you can use to launch a program in the debugger. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna run this dap-debug command. So we're just gonna go straight off with dap-debug. And when you do that, what it will do is ask you to select a configuration template. So for each language that you set up, there are going to be configuration templates that come with dap-mode. And when you run one of those, it's probably going to ask you for what program you want to run, and then it will do some default configuration to run that in the debugger. And another thing to mention is that for dap-mode to work correctly, in my experience, what you need to do is make sure that lsp-mode is already active in the buffer for what you're trying to debug, because otherwise there are variables that will not be set and it will cause problems getting your debugger to run correctly. Hi, Ronnie. So I'm going to select my, actually, I'm not going to select the index.ts file because that running a TypeScript file directly requires a little bit of extra config. I'm going to actually run the compiled JavaScript file for this program. I'm not going to go into the details of all that just because we're trying to do like a high-level overview of dap-mode. So I'm selecting this index.js, and you'll see that the mode line changes color long enough for this pop-up to show here, basically saying, oh, the debugger's listening, and it writes out some output, which is output that's coming from my program, but it exited immediately because we're not really waiting for anything. It starts up and then it finishes. So what we need to do is set a breakpoint. If you've never used a debugger before, breakpoints are a very useful tool which allow you to say, at a given line, I want the debugger to stop here so I can inspect the state of my program and also do some other diagnostic functionality to see what's happening in the program. So what I'm going to do is set a breakpoint right here on this token line, and the way I can do that is run the dap breakpoint toggle command. And I'll show you some other ways to do this too, I think. So if we run dap breakpoint toggle, what you'll see is a little dot, which is probably pretty imperceptible on the stream. There's a little dot over here in the fringe area on the left, shows that we have set a breakpoint. So now I'm going to do something. I'm going to run the debugger again, but this time what I'm going to say is I want you to run the last configuration that I already ran so I don't have to keep saying what program I want to run over and over. So I'm going to run dap debug last. When I run that, it's going to start the debugger over again. And this time what happens is that the debugger stops at the breakpoint that we set, and now a few other panels pop up. And these panels all give you information about the program that's being debugged. What I find is that they kind of like squish the view that you have of the code, so I kind of don't want all of them visible. I found a way to configure this, and I'll tell you later in the stream how to make some of these panels go away if you don't want all of them active at any given time. So what you can see is that on the left side, we have the list of breakpoints that are currently set. We also have some options for enabling whether we want to catch all exceptions or any uncaught exceptions. Also, the list of local variables that are visible at this current point in the code. The watch expressions, which we'll talk about, and also the active sessions that are running currently. So right now we can see there's only one debugging session active. It's a node session, and it gives you the stack trace of the running session basically. So if I were to click somewhere else like authenticate client, I believe that it would jump to that point in the code. So basically you jump back in the stack to that point, which is pretty interesting. So if you've used a debugger before and you've kind of walked through the stack whenever you're doing debugging, you can use this view to jump through the stack. There's also a dap stack, I think. Yeah, I think it's dap switch stack frame. If you run that, it does a completion mode for selecting what stack frame you want to go to. And for me, since I have Ivy turned on, it uses Ivy completion buffer for that. So I can go back to main basically, and then it jumps to that point in the execution stack for main. And the reason why you see all of this as JavaScript code is because I ran the JavaScript file and it doesn't have the necessary connection back to the TypeScript code. We'll see that working in a little bit. So let's see, what else do I want to say about that? So that's nice, but okay, what if you want to stop debugging? If you're just ready to be done with the session, you can run the dap disconnect command, and that basically just disconnects the debugger from the application and it basically kills the application. So that is the general workflow that you would use for just running a program with no prior information, and it works pretty well. Another thing you can do is use the dap debug recent command, which will give you the list of configurations that you ran recently. So if you're running like a couple different configurations, maybe one that's for running your actual program and one that's for debugging your unit tests, you can run both of those, and then you can use this dap debug recent to switch between like the debugging configurations that you've used recently. I'm not sure if I think this does get persisted across Emacs sessions, but I'm not entirely sure about that, so you might have to check that. But at any rate, whenever you run a configuration, it will show up in this recent list in your same Emacs session. Also, we can delete the sessions that are showing up in that list. So once you've run a session, there will be buffers that are open for... Hi, Tom. There will be buffers that are open for the various sessions that you had run before, and for some reason Ivy has decided now that it doesn't want to work. I love it when that happens. So let me use Control-XB instead. So if you look for the node list, you'll see that there is node run out and node run one out. And these are buffers that are created for the sessions that you had run before. The nice thing about this is it actually gives you the... Well, in this case, it's not wanting to switch the buffer, but it will give you the output from the previous session that you ran. So if there's like some output you wanted to see from the previous session, you can easily get back to that. So it's not like when you run in the console and you have to like scroll back up to find the old output. You can easily find that using the old buffers. The other thing is that if you use the dap UI sessions view, you have this list of sessions that are still there, and if it's kind of like if these sessions are building up and they're getting kind of annoying, you can delete them. So in this mode or in this view, I think if you do capital D on one of the lines, it will delete them. The thing you need to know though is if you're using evil mode, the key bindings are not set up for evil by default, and you will have to hit Control Z first to jump to Emacs state, and then you can use Shift D in this view. I'll probably mention that again because that's a kind of a weird thing, but that's something that's useful to know. Okay, so now let's talk about how we would customize the default debugging template. So if we wanted to run a different program by default or wanted to customize the parameters given to the debug adapter to give some extra behavior, this is what we would need to do. So there is a command called dap debug edit template, and if I were to run that, dap debug edit template, it gives me the list of configuration templates that are known for this language, and I can select one of them, like the node run configuration, and it pops up this buffer, which basically gives you the code you would need to run to configure this template so that you can make any changes you want yourself. So for instance, there is a launch request here. You can actually change this to attach to an existing process, and there are parameters you need to give to the debugger to do that. I probably won't show that here, but I will show it whenever I'm doing the individual language videos, I believe. So Let's see. What we want to do is we want to run the TypeScript code for this project directly so that we get source mapping, so we can step through the actual TypeScript code and not the output JavaScript code that gets compiled whenever we run the compiler, basically. So I'm going to copy over. Actually, let me just say what this is doing. So dap register debug template is registering a debug template that is used for a particular language. We are saying that the template name is node run. And then the type is node. So we're saying this is for the Node.js debugger, basically. The current working directory can be set using this. So if you want to set it to your project root, you can do that. And also the program, which needs to be set to say which program to run. Then also a name to tell what the debug adapter is for, or tell the debug adapter what this configuration name is. I don't really know why it needs to have it a second time. Maybe it's something that could be there by default. But I'm going to go ahead and copy over a configuration I already made for this. So what we're going to do is, since we can run this code directly with Control-X, Control-E, but the better thing to do is, if you are going to have a custom debug configuration, is create an elist file in your project root, like debug.el, and then paste in your configurations so that anyone who's using Emacs can use the same configurations that you were using. So all they have to do is just go in and basically evaluate this buffer, and they will have all the same configurations that you're using for debugging. Bruno asks if I tried DAP with Chrome or Firefox. I haven't yet, but it does support those, so I don't think it would be a problem to use those. I should cover those whenever I do the web development video, I think. So I'm going to eval this buffer. And now when we run the, let me just say one thing about what I'm doing here. So for program, we're hard coding that to the index.ts file that we were running before, just the actual TypeScript file. And this out files parameter is saying that the output files from the compiler go in this location, so it can find the source maps to map everything from the output files back to the original source. You may need similar things for like symbol files for compiled languages, etc. So it may be something that you need to be aware of. Usually what happens is when you go to the configuration for, let's say, JavaScript in this page, they will tell you that for configuration usage, so for additional documentation on the supported template parameters or about different configuration templates, refer to debug adapters. So basically you have to go to the VSCode documentation page for the debugger, but then if you go to this page, it will tell you all the configuration attributes that you can use. So you can see this out files parameter that I was using there. So that's something you should be aware of, is like the extra configurations, dap-mode won't be able to tell you about. You'll need to go to the documentation for the debug adapter for your language to find all that information out. Let's see. Kevin asks, can you show what two configs look like in this file? Yeah, basically it would just be another block, another expression. So you just have two configs. It would be fine to do that. So like if you want to have a unit testing configuration, you would probably just say, debug tests. And then you would have the program be like the entry point for your unit test, basically. Rodrigo asks if it's possible to debug a containerized app. I believe so. In fact, I think there is some Docker support for dap-mode and lsp-mode that you can use to debug containerized apps. So that's pretty useful. So let's run this new configuration. I've already evaluated it. So if I were to run dap-debug to get the main list of configurations, now we see that the new debug server configuration that I created is here. So if I were to select that, it will automatically start debugging the index.ts file that we created for that. And we see that we are getting the actual breakpoints inside of the TS file instead of the JS file, which is pretty helpful. And let's see, what else are we missing here? I think we're missing the locals display, but I could pull that up. Anyway, let's move on from that. So that's basically what you want to do for configuring debug templates for your language. There's another way to configure the debugger, which I'll go into a little bit later. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have the right configuration for that on this machine, but we will discuss it. So let's talk about actual debugging features in dap-mode. So first of all, we've already seen a little bit about breakpoints, but there's some more other interesting things you can use breakpoints for that you might have done other things to debug your application with in the past. So one example of that is what people like to call printf debugging, where you go into your code and you're trying to figure out why a certain problem is happening, and you're putting a lot of print statements in your code to try to figure out why some code path is being hit, or like the value of some variable that's being hit at any given point. So with breakpoints, obviously you can stop in the code at any given point, but there are things you can do with breakpoints that make that a little bit more useful. First of all, you can write a log message out whenever a breakpoint is hit. So let's see. I actually want to make a change to this code to make it a little bit easier to illustrate this point. So let me just add a little for loop here. No, not const. Let I equal 0. This is going to be a really dumb loop. I is less than 10, I plus plus. And then we are going to do console.log output, or let's see, I is I. And now I have to go back and build this code again. So let me drop down to the hack panel folder, npm run build. And now we've rebuilt it, so this should allow it to be debugged correctly. Okay, so now let's jump back over to our notes and then the editor. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is set a breakpoint right here. So I'm gonna say dap breakpoint, but instead of using dap breakpoint, I can use dap breakpoint log message. So if I run this command, okay, no breakpoint found. So you have to add a breakpoint first. So dap breakpoint toggle. So I've toggled a breakpoint on this line. Now I can say dap breakpoint log message, and it will ask me enter the log message. So this log message could be any normal string. So I could just say, you know, debugger is printing, but also you can interpolate actual values from the code that's being run. So if I wanted to get the value of I could use curly braces around the variable name I to get that written out in the output. So what this is going to do is make it so that instead of breaking on this line, it is actually going to write out that string that I just printed. So let me see if that happens when I run dap debug. Let's see, dap debug last. So we're going to run the same thing over again. So now we've started. We're broken on this line where it says let token, but we can see that now we've got some output that says debugger is printing 0. That came from our log message breakpoint. We also see I is 0, which came from the actual code itself, but you can now see that you don't have to write print statements in your code to debug things. You don't have to change the code at all. You can actually just use these log message breakpoints to print out the values of things at certain points. So this might save you a lot of time because you don't have to go, change the code, recompile it. You can actually go set these breakpoints even while the debugger is running. So for instance, I'm broken on this line saying let token. I can set a breakpoint on the next line. Dap breakpoint toggle, dap breakpoint log message. I can say token is, it's probably going to tell me undefined, but we'll figure that out anyway. So token is token. So now I'm going to use the next command. So whenever you're stopped at a breakpoint in a debugger, usually what you want to do is like step to the next line or step over the next line. All those commands are available in dap mode. So if I use dap next, it goes to the next line. And now I think if we go to our output, we can see that it wrote out token is undefined. So the point I'm making there is that you can add these during runtime. Whenever you are stopped at a breakpoint, if you want to see like what the value of something is going through a loop, but you don't want to stop every time to see that, you can set a log message breakpoint to get all that information written out to you in the console without having to change your code, which is pretty awesome. So then we can also do something interesting where we can set a breakpoint with a condition. So the breakpoint will not be hit until the condition is met. So for that, we can use the, let me actually kill this real quick. Disconnect, dap disconnect. So if I go back to this console log line and say dap breakpoint condition, dap breakpoint condition is the command name, then it's asking me to enter the breakpoint condition. So I'm basically going to enter a JavaScript expression. So it will only break when this condition is met. So if I say I equals 5, then we're saying that whenever I is 5 in this loop, we want to break, but no other time. So I've set the condition now, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use dap debug last to run it again. And now the debugger is going to stop. I think it's because I have log message set also. It only printed the log message whenever it was 5. So if I go back and take that log message statement off, it should stop whenever it's at 5. So dap breakpoint log message. I'm going to just clear this out, basically make it empty again. I'll disconnect from the debugging session. I will run debug last again. And now when it runs, it should break at 5. So let's see if that's the case. We can look over in our locals view and see what the value is. Actually, it broke at I. So maybe it, whenever you set these different things, it will clear out what was there before. Let me do the condition one more time. Yeah, I equals 5. So if I set this now, we are set at I equals 0. If I were to run dap continue, which basically just makes the execution continue from that point, I think, yes, it will actually pause at 5. So be aware of that. Whenever you're changing the log message and the condition, it may clear out the other thing that you had set, so you may need to go back and set it again. But still, you can always do this during debug time and not have to actually stop the program and edit code to do that. So that's a pretty useful thing that you can do with a debugger. So other things. There is a concept of a hit condition, and I didn't actually get this to work correctly whenever I was trying it before, but we'll try it again right now. It's a similar concept to what I was just doing with the breakpoint condition, where you can say, I want this condition to evaluate to true before you actually stop on this breakpoint. In this case, what it does is it waits for the number of times this breakpoint has been reached, and then for the hit count that you are looking for, it will stop whenever that hit count is has occurred. So if I were to take off the breakpoint condition here, and then set a dap breakpoint hit condition, and I don't know the right syntax for this. I'm gonna put 5, but we're gonna see if it actually works. It may not work. So we'll disconnect from this. In fact, actually, I think we can do restart. So dap restart, dap debug restart. So it will restart the current debugging session. So we restart it again, and it may have worked. The 5th time that it goes through this loop, it actually did stop. So I think that what you have to do is set the number that you want. So the number of hits before it will stop. So since I put 5, it stopped for the 5th time that breakpoint location was hit. So if you know that, like in your code, if there's a code path that gets hit 3 or 4 times before the point where you know there's a problem, this is a good way to just make it stop at that specific part without having to do any complicated conditions or adding any extra debugging information to your code to manage to catch that point. So that could be a useful thing. It's worth noting also that these things like the log message and the hit count breakpoints, they're not available in every debug adapter. It really depends on which debug adapter support it. So you may have to go look at the documentation for your debug adapter to see whether these features are supported. It may also be possible that dap-mode will tell you if it's not supported, because there are some support variables that get passed back and forth whenever the debug adapter gets attached. So dap-mode may tell you if your debugger does not support that. So you'll have to just keep that in mind whenever you're trying to use this. Okay, so you've been seeing me manually run a bunch of commands to control the debugger so far, like dap next, dap continue, etc. There's a better way to do this. So if you were to run the dap hydra command, it will pull up this nice little command palette at the bottom that gives you all of the commands that you could use for your debugging. So next, continue, step in, step out, restart, also things for like showing the locals, the stack frame, etc. So what this does is this panel will stay open as you press these letters. So if I were to press N for next, it will continue. I can step through basically the code. I can just keep pressing N to step through the code. And eventually I'll get out of this loop, and you'll see that it keeps going forward. In fact, I can even hit O, I think, for step out. Oh no, it finally did get out. So I keep hitting N, and then I can hit O to step out. So it gives you the ability to have a much more convenient way to use your keyboard to navigate through the code. What I do find, though, is that if you start typing or using any other key binding, this view will get in the way. So you kind of only want to have this show up whenever it really is warranted. Then you can press Q to make it go away. There is a way in configuration to make this show up every time the debugger stops at a breakpoint, which could be useful, but you have to keep that caveat in mind that the panel could get in the way of you typing. If you add a hook in your dap-mode configuration for the dap stopped hook, you can tell it to interactively call the dap hydra command, and then that panel will automatically pop up every time the debugger stops at a breakpoint. So that may be something that could be useful to you. ECGade asks, this could be used for debugging Mocha tests. Absolutely, it can be used for debugging Mocha tests. Basically, any program that you would run, whether it's a program or unit test, etc., you can debug it with this. So that was pretty useful for for the, sort of keyboard-based movement, but also you may notice that there are some icons up here, and they're a little bit small on my screen because I have a high DPI screen, but there's a play button, a step over button, a step out, step in, disconnect, and restart button. And this is a little floating panel that will pop up to give you these same kind of commands. So if I were to press the step over, you'll see that it goes forward. I think it may have just jumped out of the program, but you can use these buttons too if you like to have that sort of typical mouse-driven interface for clicking through. So let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say about the UI controls? Nope. So now let's talk about some of the other views that we see whenever the debugger stops. For instance, this locals view. If I can maybe close out some of these others real quick, just so it's a little bit more obvious. So in this local view, you get a tree view basically of all the things that are available in the scope of the code that's currently running, or the current stack trace that you're at. And the nice thing is you can dig into these to see more information about all the details of all the objects that are here. The one thing that is a little bit annoying is I don't think you can resize this. Oh, yeah, I don't think it's possible to resize. Maybe Ivan can tell us if there's a way to resize these windows or make them bigger, but they get popped up as like side panels. So for some reason, Emacs doesn't give you the same level of control over moving those or resizing them or making them like the only buffer. So that's a little problem that you may have to watch out for. But it's a very useful view for getting to see the inner details of all the objects without having to write print statements out or have to change your code or anything like that to look at them. You can just dig through all the objects in scope with this view. So there's also a similar view where you can set watch expressions. And I'm going to restart the debugger so we can take a look at that. Let's restart. So now we're stopped at this console.log. What I'm going to do is add an expression. So dap expression, let's see, dap UI expressions add. So if I run this command, it's going to ask me in the mini buffer what expression I want. What I can say is I just want to see what the value of I is. And now in this expressions view, we will see that I is 4. And anytime we step through the code, if I were to press N with the hydra on, it says not available. And then at this point, it says I equals 5. So you can, while you're stepping through your code, you can watch the value of a specific variable update while you're going. Another nice thing is that you can use object paths as well. So if I wanted to look at the property of an object, let's see, where is one that I'm interested in? I think that OAuth client, I don't know what OAuth client has in it. And I'm not sure, I don't think I can't complete that. This may break things. Oh, no, that's okay. Let's not do that. So it's in the C's. Should be visible here somewhere. I'm having trouble with the key bindings here a little bit. All right. Let me do Control Z. Okay, I'm still not able to get up and down in the view very easily. Okay, is that chat polar, Google Auth library, authenticate client? Yeah, let's just YouTube client 1. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this point, but basically the idea is that I could say let's say fs.access. Let's see what that does, because it's going to probably give us something really weird. This is not something you would actually do in reality, but fs.f. Okay, this is a case where the hydra is getting in the way, so I'm going to press Q to get out of that. fs.access. So now the local will give us the value of fs.access, and since it's an actual object, we can inspect the properties of that object even recursively, so you can get into the tree of the object. So it's a pretty useful view. So if you are looking for very specific values that you want to track while you're stepping through the debugger, you should use the locals view the expressions view, because the locals view is pretty busy because it gives you a lot of information and it may not be what you want to see all the time. So this expressions view just gives you that ability to focus in on a specific variable that you can watch at any given point. I find it pretty helpful whenever I'm debugging to use this instead of the locals view. Let's see if there's anything else useful to know about that. Yeah, you can remove an expression using the dap UI expressions remove. And it just gives you a list of the expressions that are active currently. So I can remove this fs.access by selecting that one and pressing enter. So yeah, that's a pretty simple one. Now we can also run a REPL. So for languages that support interactive console for the debugger, you can actually evaluate things in the console as you are debugging. So if you run the dap-REPL, dap-UI REPL command, dap-UI REPL, it will pop open another window next to the output window where you can do things like, say, I plus 100, etc. So you can run arbitrary expressions in the language using the local state at the place where you were stopped in the debugger to do certain things. Or you can even call functions. Like if I were to say console.log, hello system crafters, then we can see that the console.log actually gets written out to the program output. So it's pretty powerful because you can test what a function would do in a given state, or investigate what values are, or you could even do things like set the value of a value. So if I were to set this back to 2, I equals 2, then if I were to step through to the next frame, if I bring up my Hydra again, now we can see that I is 2. So you can even change values at runtime to see what behavior might happen in a given case. Like if you know that maybe there's a certain range of values that might cause a crash or some kind of other exception, you can invoke that a little bit more easily if you set a breakpoint, drop into the REPL, change the value to what you want it to be, and then run the code and see what happens. So that could be another useful debugging strategy that does not require you to change the code itself. So let's see. Looking at the chat. Yep, so people are just basically talking about setting up testing, debugging of tests, which is really useful. All right, so now we're going to look at tooltips. So tooltips can be useful. I found that I wasn't able to get them working very reliably for me, but they might work for other people, so I don't know if it's just a matter of my setup. I think we need to have, let me turn off Hydra again, the dap tooltip mode turned on, which seems to be active at this moment. So by default, dap tooltip mode is turned on. The idea is that you should be able to hover over a variable name, and then a pop-up will show to give you the value of that variable at that state or at that point in the debugger. It's not working right now. I think we need to turn on tooltip mode, which is a mode in Emacs that does this sort of mouse hover behavior. But even then, it doesn't work for me. So I hover over this, and it doesn't give me the value. However, you can invoke it manually by using dap tooltip at point, and then it will give you this pop-up where you can investigate the value of this this variable at this point. So that can be useful if you wanted to, be able to look at things at any given point. And for some reason, it doesn't want to go away now, which is really helpful. Let's see if I can make that go. Control ZQ. Okay, good. All right, so your mileage may vary with the tooltip functionality. Hopefully that's just a bug on my side and not something with the package itself. And we talked about UI controls already. So last thing I want to talk about before we go on to configuration is that it is possible that if you are working on a project with other people who use VS Code, you can actually reuse their debugger configurations with dap-mode. You don't have to create your own debug configurations. So what you'll normally see is that a project that someone has debugger configuration set up on VS Code will have a .vscode folder in the repo root. And inside there will be like a debug.json or some JSON file that has debugger configurations in it. If you have one of those files, when you run dap debug, it will actually show up in the list of configurations. So you may not have to do any configuration at all if someone else has already set up these debug configurations for VS Code. Since they all use the same debug adapter and debugger adapter protocol, it basically just runs the same way. So that could be a really quick way to get started. It can also be a helpful way to figure out the right way to configure the debugger for a certain scenario. Like if you have VS Code and you know how to configure it to debug something, you can just use that as the configuration, or you can replicate that same config using the register template function that we had seen before. Kevin asked, do I know if it's possible to run a promise in a stopped or a debug state? I would guess so, but I can't tell you for certain because I haven't tried it recently. So if you find out, definitely leave a comment on the video and let other people know. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about is how to configure dap mode to make some of these pains go away, because they are a bit of a pain. To me, I think this is a little bit too much obstruction of view. I think that, like, for me, the breakpoints panel could just not be there by default. The locals panel also maybe could just not be there by default. Some of these things I just want to show them whenever I need them. I don't need them all the time. So what we can do is disconnect here. And there are some variables you can set. And I don't know if this is going to work after I've already run the debugger once, but let's see. Let's see what happens. So first of all, we can set this customizable variable dap-auto-configure features. And what this does is basically says, continue to auto-configure my UI whenever the debugger starts, but only turn these certain things on. I don't want everything. I just want this subset of things. So if I were to go to the emacs.org config, I could drop this in the dap-mode config. Let me just push this over a little bit. And then let me show you what the documentation for this variable says. I'm going to get rid of these views as well, so that we don't have all this stuff in the way. So if you do Control HV, we can look up the dap auto configure features, and by default it has sessions, locals, breakpoints, expressions, controls, and tooltips. So basically everything that you were seeing before. So if you only want to see basically the sessions, the locals, and the tooltip, you can do that. So if I were to evaluate this, now these things have changed, and if I were to run the debugger again, dap debug last, then whenever the debugger starts up, in theory, only the things that I told it should show up. So now we're only seeing the locals, the sessions, and the UI controls. So already this has taken up a lot less space. Also, we can go even further than that and basically say, don't even auto-configure it at all. Let me decide what I want to see at any given point. So you can use this lsp-enabled dap auto-configure and set it to nil. The documentation for dap mode says that there's a different way to do this, but what I found is that recently in LSP mode, there was a new variable added that will cause this auto configuration happen anyway, no matter what you say to do. So there's a different way to set it. Let me actually see. This may be a customizable variable as well. LSP enable dap auto configure. LSP enable dap auto configure. This is a custom variable, so we can set it here. LSP. Yeah, let me grab that whole thing here. So what we'll do is we're going to switch these two variables out and see what happens. So I'll comment this out and I'll run this. And now whenever I run the debugger again, we're going to see that okay, so basically the same thing I already said is popping up. I think I need to go and manually set the other variable. So this is why I didn't want to do it this way. Let me start over Emacs real quick, just so that we can see what this looks like in a normal state, so that I don't tell you the wrong thing. Oh boy. Let me disconnect from the debugger. Yeah, disconnect. Okay. Yeah, sure, save that. Okay, let's start over again. So Kevin asks, can you add the pane show remove toggles to the Hydra? I think that some of that is there, but for me it didn't actually work some of the time, so it may be just a matter of configuration. I'm not sure. So now I'm going to run that configuration one more time. Let's see if it's still there. Dap debug last. Okay, so we can't do that right now. We actually have to go back to our debug.el file and run that again. So this is something you should know. Whenever you open Emacs again, you're going to have to run your debug template one more time so that it's available. So now I'm going to run dap debug last. I'm going to run the debug server template. It asked me if I've loaded the node package. So yeah, I need to open up that file first. So that's probably another reason not to put that require dap node inside of the TypeScript config, because then it won't be available. Okay, so now I'm going to run that configuration one more time, debug server. And what we see is that there was basically no UI that popped up, because what we told it is don't auto-configure the UI whenever we start up the debugger. So when we do that, we need to do a little extra work to say what we want. There's one thing that's very important, actually. In fact, let me just show you real quick what that looks like. So I'm going to set a breakpoint on this console.log line again with dap breakpoint toggle. Then I'm going to run the code. I'm going to run dap debug last. And now the code is going to stop at the breakpoint, but we don't get any of the indicators in the UI saying that where the stack trace is, what the line is, whether there's a breakpoint enabled. And that's because we don't have the dap UI mode turned on. So if you turn off that auto UI configuration, you're going to have to use the dap UI mode to make sure that you get all the stuff in the view you need without all the pains, just the stuff that's actually in the editing buffer. So let me go back to the emacs.org. And for the dap-mode config, I'm going to set dap-UI mode to 1 to make that be the default globally. And let me put that in the config section, config. And I'll run that. And then I will go back to my index.ts. I will disconnect from the debugger. I will start the debugger over again. And this time, whenever we stop, we see that the line is highlighted. We have the little indicator that we're stopped at that line. So that is enough configuration to make sure that you will have a minimal debugging experience. So if you just set this variable for LSP enable dap autoconfigure to nil and then set dap UI mode to 1, then you will get a nice minimal debugging experience that still has all the features that you saw before. They're just not visible from the start. So if I were to say dap, I think UI breakpoints, it will pop open the breakpoints pane, and I can just look at that when I need it. And then if I want to get out of it, I can press Q to close it. Same thing for dap UI locals. I can see the locals pane when I want to see it. So you could possibly set your own key bindings for toggling these things if you wanted to, so that you didn't have to have them always up. So you won't need to clutter your UI every time the debugger comes on. So what else? I think that's almost it. So the one last thing that's kind of useful for this is if you don't want the Hydra to pop up every time your debugger stops, you want to, if you don't want to set that hook to basically make it pop up every time the debugger stops, you can set a key binding that's inside of the existing lsp-mode prefix. So by default, that's like super L, but I think in our configuration, we set it to Control-CL. So if I were to use Control-CL, you'll see all of the lsp-mode default key bindings. So we can add the Hydra to that list by adding a little bit extra configuration using general.el. So that's another package we also have in the Emacs from scratch config. So we're gonna drop down here. And what we're saying is that for the LSP mode map, anytime LSP mode map is active, like in an LSP mode buffer, we are going to use the same prefix as LSP mode. We're using the LSP keymap prefix, which is a customizable variable that you can use for LSP's default bindings. And then we're saying that for the letter D, we want that to be for the debugger to run dap Hydra. So if I run this and go back to the index.ts file, I do Control-CL, and now we'll see that there is a new D. I don't know why it keeps going away, but if we do Control-CL, okay, that was in the wrong buffer. Control-CLD, now we get our Hydra to show up. So that could be useful if you want a quick way to get to the Hydra without having it up all the time, because like I said, it does cause some problems with using other key bindings after it shows up. I think that was about it for what I wanted to cover on the topic of dap mode. Like I said, we're going to cover other languages, specifically the full LSP mode, dap mode setup in the future installments of the Emacs IDE series. So for all the languages you want to see, please leave comments in the video, or you could leave issues on the Emacs from scratch repo. Also, I have my sponsors help me to prioritize which videos get created next. So if you are interested in helping to prioritize, really put some weight behind, a specific language you want to see a configuration for, you can think about becoming a sponsor, and then you can get access to our video planning repository where all the sponsors come and they can vote up certain ideas, they can leave their own ideas, etc. And I'm definitely relying on my sponsors to help me to figure out what things we want to cover in future episodes. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So thanks everybody for coming today to learn more about DAP mode. Hopefully that's helpful for you to get you started to learn how to use the debugger and get it configured for your own use. On Friday, we are going to be covering EXWM. So we're going to do our first series in the Emacs desktop environment, or first video in the Emacs desktop environment series. So definitely you'll want to be here for that if you're interested in using Emacs as a window manager. Please definitely subscribe and click the bell icon so that you get notified whenever we go live. Hopefully next time we won't have technical difficulties whenever we start. So let's just keep our fingers crossed from that. Hi, Cherry. Yeah, you're a little bit late, but that's okay. You can watch the recording. Anyway, thanks everybody again for joining. Really glad to see you all today. And until next time, happy hacking. Thanks a lot for coming.